what does Mark Carney benefit from standing there with a United Front operative or more than one? And this is broadcast on these very same Chinese intelligence media entities. It signals to the community broadly in Richmond and across Canada that Mark Carney is Beijing's guy.
The Sam Cooper election special we have delivered as promised. Tomorrow, Canadians go to the polls and cast votes in what feels like the most critical election in our nation's history. Now, I know every election is coined as being the most crucial, but Sam, I think this one is the most crucial. How do you feel?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I've been in the news business for 20 years, and for 18 of those years, I was a reporter with a large management structure above me. So I'm just reporting the facts objectively. And I still report the facts objectively, but now I run a company. And so, as you know, I can tell people if the facts change, my view will change. But I have told people during this election, voting for the Liberals, bringing them back to office would be very damaging to this country. And so that's where we are. I've reported the facts as I see them, and we'll see what happens.
And to be clear on something for people listening, like Sam is the definition of a journalist. He's not supposed to have an opinion, right? Like that's kind of the core fundamental tenet of journalism is you tell the facts as they appear to you, and you don't share your own opinion. If you do share an opinion, you're an editorial writer, which is more what I do. And that's kind of the problem that we have in news media nowadays, is that most of the news you're reading is editorialized. So I say that because Sam appearing on a podcast, this podcast or any other, and sharing his own personal perspective should be a signal to everybody listening at how dire the situation is in Canada, right?
Yeah, and I would refine that my training is an investigative reporter and a daily news reporter, but I also was in a newsroom in the Vancouver Sun where there was a guy named David Baines, a brilliant business investigative reporter, and he was an investigative columnist, meaning if he chases down the facts and at the end of the day, he says, I believe the Vancouver Stock Exchange is significantly influenced by organized crime. And that's my own view, David Baines. Nice. I've reported on it for 10, 15 years. So I'm going to tell you, the reader, that's my view. Yeah, that's where I am now. That's why I say, I, Sam Cooper, investigative columnist and founder of a platform, seller of a best-selling book internationally, am telling you that I think this enterprise called Canada is significantly influenced by transnational organized crime from China, India, Iran, with domestic organized crime working very strongly with those entities, and with very well-polished politicians being involved. Look, I can tell you, I've seen the records that say ex-politician, AOC associate, CCP associate, UFWD associate. That means Asian Organized Crime, United Front Work Department, CCP, people that I've been looking at for years. So yeah, I'm telling people these are hard-earned views supported by facts. And if this election changes this scenario, right, we see a new government and it improves its ways, then my view of what I tell people around the world, what's going on in Canada, will change.
So let's just jump into it. I mean, you listed off all of those organizations, and you have been reporting quite heavily on foreign interference in this election. And it seems like we're seeing a lot of the same that we've seen in previous elections. So Sam, let's just bird's eye view it. What have you uncovered in terms of foreign interference during this election cycle?
All right. I'm thinking back in my mind that, so the very first thing we saw and that I reported, I believe was, based on open source. I told you, and I reported that Kenny Chu, who we don't even need to go into his backstory, attacked by the United Front Work Department and CCP cyber operations in 2021. This was proven and known, and yet the Hague Commission came out and essentially minimized what happened to Kenny Chiu. And so in this campaign, Kenny Chiu was running for the nomination in Richmond. He failed, but he was attacked during the campaign by a rival who also failed to secure that seat for the Conservatives, but basically said, based on the Hague Commission, nothing happened. Kenny Chiu lied. Kenny Chiu caused racism in Richmond. So I told you, look, this just shows the Hague Commission is yet another whitewash. My view gets sharper and sharper of exactly how bad the Hague Commission was. And this will be part of my answer. But that led to me telling you that the person that benefited from the United Front and beat Kenny Chiu in 2021, Liberal Parm Baines, appeared at a Liberal, event while Mark Carney was still running for leadership of the Liberals, and who was in the crowd but known United Front operatives. And I told you that indicates to me that interference is ongoing and that Mark Carney is, the favored candidate of Beijing. And I would say that I was 100% accurate in my assessment back then. So that then gets into Chrystia Freeland, our very first, I would say, actual Ottawa sanctioned disclosure that Chrystia Freeland was attacked in a similar cyber operation, while she and Mark Carney appeared to be at least vying for the leadership. And so I think I told you and others at the time, well, that strongly indicates that Mark Carney is favored, Chrystia Freeland disfavored, and I asserted quite plausibly, because she had, whatever your view of her, she had at the least taken some regulatory action against a Chinese-linked financial entity. And there's a lot to say about that one, but we'll just skip that over. It gets into the real campaign. And we learned that the very same activity going on in the epicenter of Ministry of State Security and United Front interference in Canada, Greater Toronto Area, Joseph Tay, a Conservative candidate, a Hong Kong-born democracy activist who had a bounty on his head. Of course, we're going over old news by now, but we're not going over... we're not rehashing the analysis of the person that understands it the best. What came out when I broke that story is Joe Tay was the subject of remarks from his rival, Liberal Paul Chien, who, as you know, told Chinese journalists it would cause a significant concern or controversy if Joe Tay is elected to Parliament. And maybe you could turn him over to the consulate for a bounty. Why is that important? Because we now know, as I reported just yesterday from site disclosures, again, that that message from Paul Chien quite closely matches what we now know was the cyber boosted message from Chinese intelligence that electing Joe Tay to Parliament would be a concern for Canada due to, what you and I know is an illegal bounty on his head. So that case, I broke another story Tuesday morning that Joe Tay, when that brief came out from site on Monday, RCMP advised him he had better not go out and door knock today. And that I gather from, security issues. And there's a lot more to say around that, around Toronto in general. Some of it's sensitive, so I can't exactly say it, but I'll just give you one more background story. I broke another deep dive in this campaign that the person that Paul Chien upset in 2021 in one of those Toronto ridings, name of Bob Soroya, a repeat Conservative incumbent, my sourcing from people at senior levels in the Aaron O'Toole campaign were that Canadian intelligence reported there were concerns that Bob Soroy was being followed around by Chinese agents in the 2021 election, and that there appeared to be voter suppression intimidation efforts. So all in all, there's a continued through line. This is continuing. At this point, we don't know what other clandestine operations are going on, but what we do know is that Mark Carney, with his direct financial ties to China, should be in some ways even more favored by Beijing than Justin Trudeau, their previous favored candidate.
So I want to talk about Mark Carney's visit to Richmond, British Columbia in the early days of his campaign. Now, I can't remember if that's where his campaign officially launched, but I believe it was. I think it was the first fundraiser and the first stop in his official campaign.
It was an early visit, that's for sure. Yeah.
So let's talk about the fact that Mark Carney was in Richmond, British Columbia should ring alarm bells across the country, period. End of story. I grew up in Richmond. I could tell you that place is like ground zero, the nucleus of global Chinese money laundering and fentanyl trafficking and all sorts of human trafficking and insane shit. I could go on for hours about the things that I've seen happen in my hometown. If you really are interested in hearing more, go back through the many episodes with me and Sam. We touch on it quite frequently. Why did Mark Carney choose Richmond, BC, and who was present at that original launch or that campaign fundraiser that would cause a guy like Mark Carney to even consider going to Richmond in the first place?
That's a great question, and my knowledge is almost encyclopedic. So he goes to Richmond. Let's look at the facts here. CSIS reports that came out in the Hague Commission say that very riding of Parm Bains, where Parm Bains defeated Kenny Chiu with the assistance of Chinese intelligence, the CSIS records, redacted, say that Richmond riding is of, I forget whether it was high interest, important interest, or interest to the Ministry of State Security. So you're right, that Richmond riding and Vancouver in general, but Richmond specifically, we could call that, based on documents and my knowledge, a node of Chinese intelligence and organized crime activity and money laundering activity that stands out in the Western world. Similarly, for people internationally listening, Toronto and Markham, Ontario, would be, let's call it the doppelganger in Eastern Canada of Ministry of State Security, People's Liberation Army, Ministry of Public Security, CCP Police Station, the company, Sam Gore, elite global triad connectivity and interoperability, as the RCMP would say. So where are we focused on this discussion? Richmond and Markham. Joe Tay, running in Markham, attacked egregiously. Kenny Chiu, running in Richmond, attacked egregiously. Mark Carney, appearing very early on in his leadership campaign with Parm Bains, who, as I say, should be subject of the NSI COP report as someone that benefits from a textbook case of foreign interference in 2021, whether wittingly or non-wittingly. The history books are yet to be written on that one. But who's there? Someone from CCSA, which is the Chinese Canadian Community Services Association. We should sanction it, but it's a designated United Front work department elite leadership group in Canada whose leader met with Xi Jinping in 2023. So what I'm saying here is the very same people that the mealy-mouthed Hague Commission lawyers could only sort of indicate or hint towards in redacted Elections Canada, investigative report in Richmond on how Kenny Chiu was attacked. Those very same people who, according to a report that I have in my mind that barely came up in the Hague Commission, celebrated Kenny Chiu's defeat. Some of those people would be standing beside Mark Carney, and various media entities and Parm Bains in that early, appearance in Richmond. So that brings me to my mind, what does Mark Carney benefit from standing there with a United Front operative or more than one, and this is broadcast on these very same Chinese intelligence media entities. It signals to the community broadly in Richmond and across Canada that Mark Carney is Beijing's guy. And that brings us to, another story that I laid the path for, and Globe and Mail put the cherry on top. Mark Carney appearing around the same time in Markham with something called the Jiangsu Canadian Chinese Chamber of Commerce, another known open source proven United Front Work Department linked entity, with Mark Carney standing with United Front individuals, signaling to the community that he is Beijing's guy.
And I want to point out, when questioned by the media about this meeting, he denied ever having met with this group, which almost instantly prompted both yourself and Andy Lee to share the photos that he took at that event, meeting with that group.
Yeah, that one really hits home for me because I, with people that I can't name, since I broke these stories for Global News, I knew very well that the Jiangsu group, JCCC, was connected at the highest level to the 5 de Courcy Markham casino story, to like donation meetings with Bill Blair in Markham in 2015, to various politicians that I can't name because what I'm going to call, maybe I'll be careful here. that I call something lawfare, and that is lawyers who, I'll just say, their companies certainly have deep business relationships with China, and therefore it's interesting to me that they may be representing various people. They would seek to follow every post one does on Twitter and make sure that someone feels frightened that they say anything online over the past several years. So it takes a while for things to surface. The Globe and Mail as an entity broke a good story there. And yes, myself and Andy Lee and other researchers for the past 2 years, I would say I carefully, others maybe more aggressively, have been posting pictures of, politicians with leaders from that JCCC. So Mark Carney denying it, give him this. I would say he's learned during the campaign. That was, he's had some low points. Telling a CBC journalist to look within herself was a low point.
Yeah.
Telling people that the Globe and Mail was fake news and not to believe it was a low point. And the way he said it was, there was a deep low point. Couple that with the way he teed up Pierre Poilievre for Poilievre's best chance to equalize in this election during the debate, over the security issue, and Mr. Carney failing to pull back his candidate, Paul Chien. Those stick out in my mind. But look, without rambling on, he lied. He was at that meeting, and Canadians only know a little bit about how important it is, as I'm explaining, for a party leader to appear at those things.
Yeah.
Those are kingmaker meetings, right? And it's not just, people will say, well, we know, if we believe the Globe and Mail, we believe the Bureau, that Chinese intelligence says that unfortunately migrants from China can be very easily influenced, to vote a certain way. There's some ridings that are deeply influenced in that way, but as some others have pointed out, influence in those ridings goes beyond just votes. It goes into the fundraising that spills over from the community. And when I say community, I mean Beijing's United Front Work Department.
Yeah.
If it gets its candidates in those select ridings, it floods your party with money, and it floods the airwaves with messages that will not just, target Chinese Canadians, but could go broadly across the electorate in support of your candidate. And as I say, that brings me to another theme: Mark Carney being, supported as the champion against the big bad guy, Donald Trump, is not just a Liberal Party message. It's also a Chinese intelligence message. And that shows the, the convergence of the CCP and the LPC, I believe.
Let's talk about that messaging a bit, because you ran a couple of stories about messaging coming from Chinese intelligence to the Chinese diaspora via apps like WeChat. And I want to say something here. I am seriously reconsidering my stance on like absolute free speech because of this issue alone. I do not believe WeChat should be allowed in Canada, period. We have mountains of evidence that WeChat is a key source for Chinese intelligence to sway our elections. And I'm stuck, man. I'm really stuck, because in the United States right now, Donald Trump has basically let ICE loose on the country, and they are just running around, scooping up millions of people, putting them on airplanes and sending them to El Salvador, 90% of whom don't have previous criminal records. We were already hearing stories of people who've been scooped up in these, deportation, I don't even know what you would call it, in these deportations, who are either American citizens or, soccer coaches, like not MS-13 gangbangers or Tren de Aragua or whatever. Yet in Canada, we're just like, we have political candidates meeting with intelligence operatives from an adversarial nation that Sam Cooper, like, dude, like it's not like you're digging through like secret files here and like you've somehow backdoored into like CSIS and you're getting all this information. There's just like publicly known stuff that you're grabbing out of the air and going, hey guys, you should probably look at this. Like I'm stuck here because I don't know what the path forward should be. We have an app like WeChat, which for our listeners is basically the Chinese version of WhatsApp, which is just open game for Chinese intelligence to send whatever messages they want, to broadcast it to millions of people around the world. So can you talk about some of the messaging that's come through on WeChat in order to influence the Chinese diaspora in Canada, with the intent of swaying them toward voting Liberal?
Yeah, well, the first and most egregious is the Joe Tay case. So just to break down what we know after successive Canadian intelligence election threat monitoring disclosures, in December 2024, Tay is one of, I believe, 6 Hong Kong, immigrants around the world with a public bounty put on his head. And so very soon after, as we learned in the past week, and I reported for the Bureau, multiple accounts from Facebook to WeChat, Douyin, which is related to TikTok, I believe, should be TikTok as well. Red Note, the replacement of TikTok in the United States. There's coordinated messaging, putting out wanted posters of Joe Tay with the message that if this man, who is under a Hong Kong police bounty, gets elected in Canada, it will be a major disaster. And will Canada become a fugitives' playground? So let's just digest that for a minute. If I really think about that, yeah, ban WeChat. Because look, Chinese Canadians, any Canadians, are being told our country will become a fugitives' playground because a person, I believe Hong Kong, Christian, broadcasting from Toronto about the egregious violations of, one country, two systems, how Beijing broke the rules and like enforced their thuggish national security laws. If this man, who's a Canadian citizen, can be intimidated like that, and not only the diaspora, but anyone that understands Chinese can be told we are becoming, as a democracy, a fugitives' playground, who's asserting ownership of Canada in that message, right? Beijing and their organized crime thugs, who would be the exact same type of people following door knockers around, so that a conservative candidate in Toronto, not just Joseph Tay, but various ridings, is probably like living under a certain amount of fear that they could be followed in a Canadian election. So those messages are going out online. They're being run through WeChat, which is one of the main vectors. Not only that, Beijing, with its internet censors, which is Chinese intelligence, are suppressing reporting of Canadian news that should bubble up on these apps that people that read Mandarin use in Canada, so that when they search for Joe Tay's conservative election campaign platform, which will be the same as Pierre Poilievre's, it doesn't come up. That information is suppressed on the internet. What comes up instead is those Joe Tay wanted bounty. Is Canada becoming a fugitive's paradise? Right? So it just shows you the attack and the suppression of real information. So that I could go there, I haven't had time to monitor every day the open source on WeChat, but I believe very likely multiple ridings are facing that kind of activity. I've reported myself because I'm close to some people within Chinese Canadian journalism that are fighting that system. In the final week of the campaign, yet again, on one of these Chinese intelligence controlled Toronto websites, the message is put out that the Conservative Party of Pierre Poilievre is anti-China and has anti-China clauses in their campaign, and that China's the enemy. This can lead to racism against Chinese Canadians. So in a nutshell, just repeating the very same, what I call air war attacks that were used against Aaron O'Toole in the previous election. So that's the type of messaging from a party leader to a whole party to an individual candidate that's rolled out on these Chinese controlled platforms. And I think we've talked about it before. Yeah, free speech is great, but just like the US government has found, if Beijing is in control of TikTok and they won't sort of put in firewalls to sequester that weaponizing of the app, then yeah, it should be canceled.
And that's where I'm sitting on this now. Because we have a large, I got in a fight, an argument with a lady in my community not even a few days ago. She had seen Brave New Normal, a few of my episodes with you. It's amazing how these things travel. And she was upset because she felt that we were unfairly framing the Chinese Communist Party to Canadians. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that is impossible, because I know much more than I've been able to say.
I know much more than we've talked about here. I've studied the history on this. Mao Zedong killed more people than any leader in human history, aside from Genghis Khan, right? I'm going to try not to get passionate about this. And she came up to me.
To your neighbor, I don't know if I've stressed enough that the US government knows that the Chinese Communist Party is believed to be the top tier global drug trafficking organization, intentionally trafficking fentanyl into North America, intentionally harming our societies. So once you understand that reality and fact, you cannot frame the CCP as being, I can't be too negative, because I know more than that.
Well, I mean, and look, top tier nation influencing globalist networks like the World Economic Forum, period. Anyways, she came up to me. I was at the grocery store, and she started nice, and then she started becoming volatile. And she was saying to me, you don't understand. You don't understand how great China is. Have you ever been to Beijing? Have you ever been to Peking? Have you seen these cities? Have you seen what they created? It's like, if you're here, you came here for a reason, right? Now, whatever your reason is, you're here for that purpose, right? And you left there because this is obviously the better option for you, whether it's education, healthcare, job opportunities, whatever it is, right? But you left that place for a reason.
Joseph Tay is not allowed to travel back there because he would be in physical danger. He's in physical danger in his own country of Canada now. I cannot travel there. I have received certain information putting me sort of in Joseph Tay's situation. So look, to people like that, I think what I would say is, I'm sorry to be a little bit direct, but you're suffering under a condition of brainwashing.
And look, this was exactly where I was getting to. Joseph Tay is a Canadian citizen. He's a political candidate. He was alerted by our federal law enforcement agency to not campaign because he might be in danger. Now, I'm sorry, but anybody who is pro-communist China has to look at this realistically. How neutered is our law enforcement in Canada when we have a political candidate who can't even go door knocking because something violent, some form of violence might befall him? How neutered are we? How feckless are we? That we have a political candidate in a key riding, by the way, who can't campaign and was told by our federal law enforcement agency to not campaign for the sake of his own safety.
Yeah, I mean, even when you know these things, it's hard for it to sink in deep enough of, as you say, how powerless our federal law enforcement is and the reasons behind it. And as I've told you, there's people in the US government and there's people in the Canadian government that believe that it's political reasons why the RCMP is so neutered.
Right.
And I've come to the position that I find that very, very plausible.
I'm sorry about that go back thing. That was just what was in my mind as she was berating me in the middle of a grocery store. But the question I really wanted to ask her, and I didn't get to it because I'm just not an asshole, so I just kind of absorbed her abuse and then went on my way. But what I wanted to ask her was, well, then what brought you here? Right? Like, your parents experienced the Great Leap Forward. Your parents experienced the Cultural Revolution. Have you ever talked to them about this legacy?
That just triggers a known fact from my research. The WeChat messages from should be the Ministry of State Security are so sophisticated that in attacking Kenny Chiu and Aaron O'Toole as a Trump-like candidate in 2021, they say the Chinese Communist Party has advanced greatly in the past 20, 30 years. Yes, there were even historical incidents where, and I'm using the writer's voice because these are very personal. I've analyzed them. And this comes from Aaron O'Toole's dossier, tabled as evidence. These messages would say the Chinese Communist Party made a lot of mistakes. I'm not even such a fan of them, but I have to admit, they've come a long way in recent years. Yeah. So when you think about the sophistication of that messaging, and then you say, is it plausible that this nice woman who wanted to engage you and then it sounds like found herself starting, her temper starting to rise? Look, how likely is it that she's reading that type of sophisticated message on her Beijing controlled app? I'd say extremely likely. And I've experienced it myself. When people reached out to me when I was at a previous news organization, breaking news about China stealing PPE and connections to organized crime of these very same United Front entities in Vancouver and Toronto, I would get messages from people saying, basically trying to fish me or trying to get close I'm from the community. I don't even like the CCP myself, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's the same stuff. I mean, I know I've been approached by sophisticated people with that same message.
Yeah, well, it's difficult, right? Because it's like, look, Sam, I think you and I are like 20 episodes deep, right? And the story just keeps going. It never ends. And I'm sitting here on the eve of, again, the most crucial election in the history, at least recent history of our country. And we're looking at China's involvement in, social media networks, political networks, business networks being like a critical factor. And I don't like, I often think to myself, like, imagine if Canada was like influencing the American election, right? Imagine if like we were like sending out messages imagine if there was a large Canadian diaspora in the United States, millions of people, and we're broadcasting pro Kamala Harris messages to Canadians. Do you know how fast we would get shut down? I mean, it would be like that would almost, I hate to say it, but that would almost spark a war. Right. And so like, why are we here?
There would be people whoever was involved would certainly face the potential of jail, because as I've said, whether you're Martha Stewart, Mayor Eric Adams, Donald Trump, anyone at any level in the US, whether you agree with the prosecution or not, there's going to be a lawyer and a prosecutor that will make the case. Canada, no. If you're political, you're untouchable.
Right. And it's so, let's pivot here. Let's talk about other foreign interference, because there was a story that ran on India's support of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party. Can we talk about that a little bit? What in your reading and in your research, what impact did India have on Pierre Poilievre's campaign, if any?
Yeah, we can talk at length. I mean, I'll start by saying I'm the one, shortly after I launched the Bureau in 2023, that broke the story that the Conservative Party leadership campaign was targeted in 2022, and that India, a series of stories I reported, Indian community leaders allegedly had been involved in, supporting a certain candidate, gatekeeping the community away from another candidate. So that was certainly serious. But the information I had from October 2022 very important CSIS document was that Chinese proxies election interference in that campaign for the Conservative leadership, I judged, and my read of the document, I need to be careful here, was orders of magnitude greater than India's. So India, serious interference. China, incredibly more sophisticated and serious. In both cases, some candidates supported, some not. So let's talk about, that's documented fact. So what else is reported? Before we get to Poilievre and Patrick Brown, I think what I've reported on India and Khalistan, which others have filled in blanks from my groundbreaking reporting, what happened on the China side is that proxies bought party memberships for a certain conservative leadership candidate. They said they wanted to make a certain party that is anti-China, less anti-China. Some unidentified candidate commented that, they understood how the underground worked. How does this come up? I guess CSIS has a wiretap on someone. But anyway, people can read my stories, but what do I think happened there? I think David Eby's advisor was involved in a BC-based elite-level interference proxy network that supported Patrick Brown, a leadership candidate, in a sophisticated way. As I've learned from conservative sources, it appears that they were trying to move votes from Poilievre to Patrick Brown to support Jean Charest, who is a very, did he do some work with Huawei at a lawyer level? I don't know if you have that fact. I possibly.
I don't know. No. Okay.
So yeah, interesting. I mean, that is very interesting. That wasn't in the document, but I've been able to piece certain things that were in a document and certain open source that I talked about in my National Press Gallery sort of news conference. So that's that. You asked about India interfering. Others have reported that, Patrick Brown appears to have been the politician gatekept away from the Hindu, let's say the Indian government, more, Hindu-based community, and that Poilievre appeared to be supported by the Indian government Hindu community. If you ask me, did I read that in my documents? No. Does it make sense? Yeah, I would say that adds up. Does it add up that, the Sikh community or Khalistan separatist community with linkages to terror and organized crime, was not supportive of Poilievre, but was supportive of another candidate? All of that would line up, I would say. I think so. And that brings me to a point. As I do, that, and the documents say that China is, by orders of magnitude, becoming my most favorite phrase, the greatest threat to Canada, which even Mark Carney admitted that fact in the campaign.
That was confusing.
We can get to that. My point is, you asked about India. Khalistan threat networks and Indian threat networks and the sophisticated activity they're up to in Canada is now the second tier threat and a very serious threat, and involves many of the same things. And I know this from Canadian government people and US government people. So that kind of, in a neat bow, that's my opinion of what happened in that story.
Now, let me ask this question, because, a lot of these Indian networks and these Khalistani networks are very much involved in the illicit distribution of fentanyl, mainly through trucking companies that we know of, and organized crime
and triads, and
organized crime networks. So you have the Conservative Party, who are very, like Pierre Poilievre is, if elected, he pledges to go very hard on crime. We're talking life sentences for people who distribute and sell fentanyl. So why would those networks be in favor of a Poilievre or a conservative government?
Well, I don't know everything, but what I know is people have not accurately described. What we have here is a part of India which is separatist, and their activity in North America involves, at a core level, underground finance, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, to fund terror, or anti-Indian state separatist activities. So that's a huge component of the Indian diaspora. And the Hindu or pro-Indian government stateside also has those elements and appears to be using, gangsters from around India, whatever part of society they're from, in some of their activities. So it's hard to parse who is more exposed, whether, you're vulnerable to people that support the Indian government, who has intelligence agencies that are tasking organized crime, or if you're more exposed to the terror networks that are, like that with the Mexican cartels and the triads and all the bad foreign networks in Canada. It's just a mess. All I can say, it's a mess.
It's a soup. It's a soup of criminality, essentially, right? And, see, what I took from the whole, Indian interference story was nothing. I took nothing away from it, because I read it and I thought, well, Justin Trudeau stood behind a dais on internationally broadcasted television and accused the Indian Prime Minister of sending assassins, terrorists into Canada, with the explicit purpose of murdering a Canadian citizen. This is something that you say through diplomatic back channels. This isn't something that you broadcast to the world. So of course, Modi and the Indian government are going to be in support of the liberal opposition, right? I mean,
they will. And I just saw a tweet from the new FBI director, or a post, whatever you think of him, saying that the US government had arrested an illegal migrant who was Sikh alleged terrorist, and that the US government had learned that they were believed that there were going to be attacks on Indian police stations and US government police stations. So again, right, everything that the Indian government can be accused of, and I'm saying, yeah, they're doing that in North America, that separatist terrorist element could be doing probably worse, a lot worse in North America.
Absolutely. And the Indian issue is much more complicated, as you just detailed, a few seconds ago, right? Like there are separate groups involved here. This, when you talk about China, you're talking about a number of organizations that operate as tentacles for the core party. Whereas with this Indian interference story, you're talking about really a number of groups, some both on either sides of a divide, right? Loosely organized and loosely connected to each other. So you're talking about Indian separatists, the Khalistani movement, and then you're talking about the Indian state. And so when you delve into the India side, it's far more convoluted, far more complicated. And, who is really in support of what is kind of left up to interpretation, right?
It's left up to we could call it a type of war on Canadian and American soil that's being fought. And, what can you really say about judging kind of like a separatist state fighting their battle to have their own state separate from India, but doing it in North America, and the Indian government taking egregious actions to protect its interests, including by, using organized crime in North America. It's an insane proposition, but this is where we're living in 2025. And
it's all here. That's the worst part.
And it's worse in Canada than anywhere else, probably in the Western world.
And I guess this is where we circle back, right? Because, Sam, you're doing the best reporting on this. I believe in the world today. I think you are a once in a lifetime person in a once in a lifetime place in history, and you were put here for a very specific reason. I think you being in Canada during this period, that if you want proof God exists, there it is, right? and I mean that, man. I read your reporting and I'm like, yeah, this guy is here right now doing this because the world needs to know this. And you've been covering this stuff. I mean, dude, you have drawn a roadmap, and yet here we still are. Canadians are about to go to the polls. A lot of us have already voted in advance, and you can include me in that. I did my part a few days ago. But here we are in this soup of just criminal activity. And so I guess sticking with the theme of the election, do you expect Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to be more aggressive with this? Or do you think that this thing is so big and so all-encompassing that it'll just swallow the Conservative Party as well?
That's a great question. It's like it's hard to get that advanced. I mean, it's interesting that we're now in a position in Canada that no matter who wins, it looks like the Conservatives will take the popular vote, but the Liberals, and they'll have to run the table to beat the Liberal Party, which controls Eastern Canada. I mean, not counting the chickens before they hatch in the election, but we've seen that even when it looks like the Liberal Party is being wheeled into the urn, or whatever my metaphor can be
The
there,
crematory, the
the
crematorium.
crematorium, they can come back because their level of election in efficiency, they call it, is unmatched. And so, you know, if you're the leader of the opposition party and you find that even if you fight what you believe is the closest thing to an honorable campaign available to you in Canada, you will migrate to those very same methods of diaspora vote generation through turning a blind eye to foreign intelligence, and as I'm asserting, their main vector, or a prominent vector, of organized crime and corruption. And it's already happened in the Conservative Party. There were people, I'm told, at a kind of in Canadian police and intelligence level, that a lot of eyebrows were raised that, even in Harper's government, who had taken a stronger line on China, they backed off through various lobbying from these Quebec pro-Beijing trade lobbyists we've talked about before, and through kind of the diaspora United Front agents that worked very closely with, a prominent non-Stephen Harper Alberta politician. And so, yeah, if you can't beat them, join them. I think that's the concern, that if Canada doesn't do what I and others have recommended and get some modern laws on counter organized crime, counter foreign interference, then the political side won't make the right adjustments. If the Conservatives could win, I didn't hear them promising to put in a RICO Act, an anti-racketeering law. I heard them make some tough on crime, announcements. I heard them, this is another point, say that they're going to mandate through court order that addicts actually get treatment. I say that's controversial, but that's one part of the fix. Anyone living in Vancouver, I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, that could be impactful. So if you take that and then you put the port police back in Vancouver Harbor, which Poilievre didn't commit or promise to do, if you get anti-racketeering laws, if you get, as Mayor Brad West in Port Coquitlam says, if you use the notwithstanding clause to put the hammer down on triad bosses, yeah, a conservative government, which would be the most likely one to take those actions, could turn the tide, I do believe. But they would have to win in the first place.
And that's a big if, right? And that's a big if. I want to talk about the liberal. See, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I don't know. Maybe because I live in a different world. But I watched the liberal campaign, and to me, it's like they're not saying anything. It's just more platitudes, and maybe that's what Canadians like. Maybe they want to hear elbows up, and we can do this. Whatever, insert Instagram inspirational meme here, right? But I just never heard, even in the debate, I did not hear any substance come from Mark Carney at all. It's just all platitudes. And look, I can sit in front of this camera and go, we're going to introduce solar panels on the roofs of every home in Canada. We're going to reduce taxes by 35%. You can just say stuff. Right. And that's what it feels like to me was happening in that liberal campaign, is they're just saying a lot of stuff. And then, oh, here's Mike Myers. Remember him from Wayne's World? You know what I mean? Like there was just nothing in it to me that seemed like it had any meaning at all. It's just platitudes. Right.
I agree. And what I take away from that, whether I'm right or wrong, I think we still have, well, I mean, not to rush anyone, but we've got a major population boom demographic, the baby boomers.
Yeah.
Many of them still, I think, mentally living in the Pierre Trudeau days of, a sense that Canada was, a rising star in the world. And, we could have been, but I think a lot of them if they had the ability to self-examine or face the hardships that younger generations have, they would not have those same views. But they were just very easily manipulated into believing that never 51st state, elbows up, just a kind of a bunch of Jerry Butts type, very well conceived political slogans were worked. And to the point where we have this superstar, absolute globally respected person, whatever you think of him, Mark Carney, who could have come in, and if he was the best technocrat in the world, as he's supposed to be, come up with a brilliant campaign. And people like you and I that are open-minded, I'm sure intellectually we'd say, wow, even if I think he's a bit owned by China or largely owned by China, he's put out a blueprint that, were he to follow it, could change the country. But you're right, he didn't. They just ran on those safe gaslighting slogans. They had their elder, blue and gray haired voters all sewed up who have voted that way, many of them for generations, whether NDP, not generations, decades, NDP or Liberal. And yeah, they didn't have to put out anything. And so what's the proof of that? When Carney, the global superstar technocrat, comes out with his costed platform, it was Justin Trudeau's. And this is known and proven. Everyone, people, it's not contested, right? So that just, it's a Liberal Party that doesn't have to fight very hard to win certain elections. Maybe it happens this year, but that's what happened in this campaign.
And I was potentially going to have this guy on the podcast, but it fell apart at the last minute. One of Mark Carney's campaign managers got in touch with me, or I shouldn't say that. Somebody who works on his campaign. Let's just say that. And he was like, listen, man, all of this, I think the thumbnails for all of my recent episodes kind of pissed them off. It's like somebody saw it and they got upset about it. But he was like, you don't understand who this guy really is. And he was kind of telling me behind the scenes, Mark Carney's hilarious. He's just full of dad jokes. He's just a dad. He's just a normal guy is basically the message that they were trying to get across to me. And the truth is, I probably wouldn't mind sitting down and having a beer with the guy. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy to talk to. He seems relatively personable.
I'd say he got better throughout the campaign at that too. Yeah.
But I think that what he represents, because I just don't think he's put much thought into what he's doing. To lean into the conspiratorial side of things, I really truly do believe he's a globalist javelin thrown in the direction of Donald Trump. I think he is a last resort effort to try to save this whatever plan they had for this country, whatever roadmap they had in front of them. And I think as a person, he's probably a nice enough guy, but I think what he represents is just deeply evil, just profoundly evil. And I don't know if Mark Carney himself is even aware of what he represents, but the fact, what you just highlighted, he's basically running on Justin Trudeau's platform. And Justin Trudeau's platform is what got us into the situation we're in now. So I guess, Sam, my question for you is, if we're just rolling with the same ideas for the next 4 years, where does that take us, in your estimation?
Well, yeah, to what you said, I mean, you're not alone. And you know that I'm a little reticent to see the big picture in Mark Carney, but I've had people that have always proven right, been telling me for years, it doesn't really matter who runs for the Liberal Party. It could be anyone. And what really matters is sort of, the Canada-China Business Council or certain, Quebec corporations.
Yeah.
And again, I've been from Missouri on that. Come on, do I really need to believe that? But no, these are people within government agencies saying that's the way it is. And then you see Carney's campaign just fitting into those slots as I read that he's, a Catholic gentleman. And, you say, I say, I agree. He's come off as personable. So you would think that someone with those morals, hearing that their candidate was suggesting that another Canadian be delivered to a consulate for a bounty, etc., would act very quickly. But that type of person, even if they had that integrity and morals inside, by choosing to follow a certain path in life, what it's suggested to me is they'll have to kind of agree with the more powerful and even more wealthy people behind them. And that's what it looks like. So where do we go from here in the next 4 years if Canadians vote for Mark Carney? More of the same. It would just fit into that same box. You've got, even though Mark Carney is saying in the debate that China is Canada's greatest sovereignty or national security or existential threat, which is a surprising admission, was that just tossed out there to kind of, draw a little line between the attacks on him that he secured a $250 million loan from the Bank of China when his, investment fund was kind of facing going down the tubes on their Chinese real estate investment. Yeah, that by him saying that, it kind of reminded me of that. Not to get off track here, but there's the movie about a mob guy it's Jimmy Hoffa who goes out. He's like, we have to go after the mob, and there's a couple of New York guys that are saying, what's he doing? They're like, hey, he's just campaigning. He doesn't really mean that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how Mark Carney and China remark. I chuckled myself. Could that be the sort of comparison to his remark there? Yeah, maybe. But if Carney and the Liberals win, there's no reason for them to change course on China, change course on fentanyl coming into Canada, change course on, foreign organized crime owning significant portions of Canadian cities and pricing people out. There's no reason for Canada to change unless the US government gets increasingly assertive and aggressive, which would bring us back to the next campaign where the US wants to make us the 51st state, which would bring us to aging boomers saying elbows up, but there's less of them, unfortunately, not to usher people off, but people get less able to vote when they're in a nursing home. And, their grandchildren become a more important. So maybe I've looked too far in the future, but you asked me what happens if the Liberals win. That's a little bit of, too bold forecasting on my part.
Yeah, well, no, I think you're on the nose. And so let's close on this. The Privy Council, which is a federal government agency directly tied to the Prime Minister's office in Canada, released a report for their projections for the next 15 years in Canada. And it is horrifying. I mean, look, so a federal government agency releases a report that outlines its projections for the next 15 years, should we stay the course that we're on. And basically it amounts to a complete and total societal collapse in Canada. I mean, just like utter devastation.
A plausible forecast. And it gets into what I just said. I've made a too bold forecast of what could happen. And when I read that Privy Council report, I know that you had asked me months ago about an RCMP report that came out in ATIP, or Freedom of Information, saying a younger population can get radicalized due to their inability to have social mobility or ever own a home. And so, look, of course, that's the through line into that Privy Council report, which memorably says that poor Canadians may start foraging for food, or Canadians can lose faith in the system. I believe it tax-paying, it was essentially saying Canada will have a brain drain of people that find no social mobility. So we're talking about, teachers, lawyers, doctors, hedge fund managers. Everyone will go to put words in their mouth, people that, can want, what were the words? By doing the right thing, you should be able to get ahead. Paying your taxes, being meritocratic, talented. They've learned essentially that the view that we've been talking about, that Canada is going off the rails, is true. And so the Privy Council office said, I take that to mean state hollowing or state capture, right? Your state will be hollowed because the people that support the state, a strong, talented middle class, will leave the more impoverished level of society will be stuck there. And what they didn't put in that report is the captured elite. And what I am saying, what was missing in the report is transnational organized crime and foreign actors that take over all the riches of the society and block that social mobility. They will remain. And so Canada will be done. I've filled in the blanks of what I think that the PCO was saying there.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if you're filling in the blanks. You're just translating what's written in plain English.
Yeah.
Like I read it and I was just stunned. Because we're, for the last 10 years, we've been living in this fantasy world where we pretend that, social concerns take precedent over economic reality, right? That as long as we, right, as long as we fly our green flag and we race toward net zero, and we put carbon taxes on everything and trans rights and Black Lives Matter and all of the groups, right, that everything is just going to magically work. Meanwhile, our economy was imploding underneath it. And now, like, what our own federal government is releasing reports that is basically highlighting and underscoring the direct consequences of this behavior, right?
The direct consequences. And what did we just talk about? The baby boomers that are still living the Pierre Trudeau fantasy. At this point, it's been proven to be a fantasy.
Yeah.
They, keep voting for the people that support that fantasy and benefit from that fantasy. But 15 years in the future, that demographic has almost disappeared. And what you have left is the people that paid for their pensions, the people that healthcare got broken, while they were supporting those people aging and moving into nursing homes. Yeah. Those people have become disillusioned and left. And so your society has crumbled.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, with the boomers is, like, I hate to put everything on them because some of my favorite people to talk to, I got to say almost all other than Sam Cooper, are all boomers. I fucking love them. I love talking to them. I want
to say that I don't like the throwing everyone into that bucket.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of those memes have been pretty accurate.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the boomers, they benefited from being in Canada during the most beneficial time. And so they don't want anything to change because they continue to benefit. I mean, look, when property values inflate by like unfathomable degrees, they're the ones who benefit because they're the ones who have paid off their homes, right? Like they're free and clear. So to be sitting on an asset that triples or quadruples in value thanks to government mismanagement is great for them.
All they did was, some of them didn't even, go to, I don't want to categorize people. All they had to do was be very, very mediocre in Canada to get to sit on, a $3 million asset and move down to Florida if they can still stand living with Americans, right?
Right. But that's the point. The point is that they have just a cornucopia of options. Meanwhile, our generation, mine and yours, we're left cleaning up the mess. And I think that's where the anger toward boomers comes from.
There's a lot, yeah. It's
right. And
very visceral.
Some of which is very much justified. But I know that there are a lot of responsible boomers out there who are really worried about the country they're leaving us. It just so happens that they benefited greatly. I mean, a lot of these people, came up during a time when, they had pensions that like more than covered 2 lifetimes worth of retirement for them. Like they're a lot of the boomer generation are living fat. And look, I'm happy for them. They worked hard. They were able to cruise into retirement and live the last portion of their lives happy and comfortable. But yeah. I think what's missing is a lot of the boomer generation isn't taking into consideration whether or not their children and grandchildren can live the same lifestyle.
Yeah, and who's gaslighting them into believing they're doing the right thing? They're elbows up, they're fighting off the enemy from the south. And as you and I know, that's just like the biggest lie you can imagine. Even if they're getting very unruly in Washington, they're not the enemy of Canada and never will be. I don't think. Apparently, there's some people in Ottawa that think they're pretty smart in universities and various think tanks that think that's the real story. I don't think that's the real story.
I don't think it is either. And I think that was, I think Trump gave Mark Carney and the Liberals an alley-oop in his tariffs and just the rhetoric that was coming out of him in the lead up to this election.
Yeah,
right?
An unintended alley-oop. So never let anyone say that Mr. Trump is the master strategist that always gets everything right. I think he would take that trolling back if Mark Carney wins and makes China stronger north of the border. That would be a big mistake.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we can end here, Sam. Like that Privy Council report, their own projections just see a dystopian hellhole 15 years from now. But what we also haven't considered is, if Mark Carney and the Liberals win this election and China is emboldened just north of the United States, I don't think the Privy Council can project what happens then because, as you and I have discussed on many occasions, I mean, there's a high probability this country might not even exist just as a consequence of that, right?
Yeah, we can't rule out kinetic possibilities on our soil in our lifetimes. And, Canadians, I wish everyone had, the experience of people. Like I was blessed to be able to travel over to Taiwan and meet so many wonderful supporters of a democracy living right across from the people that want to eventually hopscotch across the world and take what's ours and are already doing a pretty good job clandestinely. Yeah. I'm just very, very interested that people at a high level in the Silicon Valley are now most interested in being private weapons manufacturers for the U.S. government to bring shipbuilding and, autonomous torpedoes and things up to speed with China. And if people, again, I've said it before, if people understood how seriously I believe the U.S. government is taking that very near-term kinetic possibility, so much more would be clear in Canada to a lot of people.
I think so too. And that's why everybody needs to go and read the Bureau. Sam, you have millions of people reading your publication now. That must be such an awesome, amazing feeling, dude. You're the king.
No.
You are.
No, I mean, I'm doing what I've been trained for, and now I'm able to do it freely. So that's the biggest blessing, being able to give my best version of the facts and truth freely. Yeah.
Well, I will say you are the media kingpin of Canada now. I'm the captain now, right?
There you go.
But dude, I'm very happy. Your success is just, it's well deserved, man. And people, listen, this is the election special. Sam and I covered a lot here, but there's so much more to all this, and you need to sign up at thebureau.news as a paid subscriber. Sam, you're putting a lot of stuff behind the paywall now. I love it, dude. I love it. And it's
go to the website every morning quick, and you can still get your free read. It's important. That's why there's not a paywall from the start. So go there quick and often, because that could change in the near future.
Yeah, guys, support the Bureau. I mean, dude, you're doing the most. I how many times can I kiss up to you on every episode? But you're doing the most support work in this country, man. And you know, people are watching this on April 27th, the day before the election. Guys, listen, get out there, vote. You know, in the future, Sam, I actually would love for us to kind of dive into our parliamentary system, because, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can manipulate democracy through the British parliamentary system, and it's designed that way in order to maintain the status and power of the monarchy. And I think down the road, we need to really rethink whether or not the parliamentary system is the right system for Canada. But as of right now, you have the opportunity to share your voice, and you share your voice when you vote. So guys, get out there, vote. Let's change this country. Let's look. I'm not one of these people who thinks Pierre Poilievre is a one-size-fits-all cure. Sam, I don't think you are either. I think you and I have been looking at this stuff long enough, yourself specifically, sitting in cemeteries, reading top secret documents. You and I have done this long enough that we have a healthy dose of cynicism living in our hearts. And so I don't think either of us think Pierre Poilievre is going to fix everything. But I think that if we're going to get any form of change whatsoever, it's going to come through Poilievre and the Conservatives. Would you agree?
When you ask that question, what's in my mind is which candidate has the better chance of making some measures in government that will avert that future that the PCO has said could be plausible of this dystopian Canada, a captured or crumbled state. I would be entertained if anyone can make the argument that Mark Carney and the Liberals will be the better government to try to avert that future. Yeah. It's just in the policy of the Conservatives, I think. Look who wants to vote for them. Those very same young people that are going to be, you know, the radicalized, proportion of Canada under that future. So that's my answer. Yeah, I'm not partisan in any way. I go with the facts, and the Conservatives, there's no question in my mind, they have a better chance of averting that dangerous path that our nonpartisan PCO, which is there to advise cabinet members, is saying, hey, this is a concern.
And on those young people really quickly, because Sam, I did want to touch on this today, but we didn't have time. You know, I want to say, like, I really do feel like we're in a situation where there is a contingent of those young, radicalized, very far extreme left minded individuals who know exactly where another liberal term will take us, but have such hate and spite for everybody who doesn't think like them that they will happily self-destruct the country just in order to watch the rest of us implode as well. And I truly do believe that.
Well, there are known people, because I've seen them posted on X, when churches are burning, and we both know how much the Indigenous population has suffered. We both know that there have been, allegations that haven't been proven yet, and people started burning churches, and there are those radicalized young Canadians saying, burn it down. Yeah. And they may have a lot more behind them than just a heart full of hate.
Right. And that's the thing, is it's not about the well-being of the nation. It's not about the future of the country. It is merely about, crushing their perceived enemies. And those are the people that truly terrify me, because I think they don't believe in anything. All they believe in is destruction. And that's all they want to see. And so, guys, get out there, get off your couch and go vote. I know it's a long lineup. You're going to be standing there for an hour or two, but go out, let your voice be heard. Sam, should we circle back in a couple of weeks, do a post-mortem and reflect on all this?
I think we got to. I mean, you always say people check out the Bureau. I say check out Jason. He's a solid, very sharp political analyst. No matter what you think of where he's coming from, he's always got interesting thoughts on politics.
Damn, Sam. You gave me a little smoke. I like it. I'm gonna clip that out and I'm gonna make it my profile. All right, guys. Sam, tell everybody where they can find you one more time.
Just go to thebureau.news. Thebureau.news. Same thing that's on Jason's shirt right there.
There it is, baby. And
at Scooper Cooper on X.
I am a habitual refresher of Sam Cooper's feed, and if you follow Sam, you will be as well. But most importantly, sign up for a paid subscription. Thebureau.news. It is my morning reading. It needs to be yours as well if it isn't already. Sam, circle back in a few weeks.
Yep.
All right, my brother.